Okay,
Yes, looks good.
excellent.
So,
Well,
Scott, most of us in agriculture view regulations and permits with about the same enthusiasm as getting a root canal. So, but we hope that this new regulation at the state level is actually going to simplify things. So, walk us through it, how we got here, and what this new regulation entails.
all right. Well, hello everybody. Again, my name's Scott Garncarz, and yeah, so back in 2023 was the Sackett versus EPA, in which the Supreme Court ruled on what is actually, in a sense, waters of the U.S. And in that ruling, it narrowed what actually is considered waters of the U.S. And in Colorado, they went through and passed a bill to cover what they were calling gap waters. Now it's these, it ranges from, I've heard anywhere from 60 to 80% of Colorado waters were no longer protected with this after this decision was made. And so with that, became House Bill 13, or sorry, House Bill 24 1379 was passed in 2024, and that led to the development of our current dredge and fill. And I'll get into a little more on the regulation here in a few minutes. But today I'm going to just kind of go through and define what dredge and fill is. I'm going to talk about the current status of the program, implementation of the dredge and fill program. I'll walk you through the website, and then I'll go through exemptions and exclusions. And then I have a little more information concerning ditches. And then I will pause for some questions. And then I'll get into the temporary authorizations, our isolated state waters, our general authorizations, individual authorizations, compliance and enforcement, and then overview of the fees. So what is dredge and fill? Dredge is basically the excavation of materials. Fill material is deposition of materials. And these are concerning aquatic resources. And why this is important to regulate is because dredge and fill can degrade water quality and destroy habitat if not properly managed. And also, wetlands provide beneficial functions like flood management and pollution filtration. So now I'm just going to go through some photos of dredge and fill activities. This is a photo of a excavator in a pond uh, and doing some dredging. This is a photo of a well pad that was built in a wetland, and you can see the vegetation kind of change. So this is an example of the fill. And then this photo is an example of where they dredged the river, removed the rocks, and put it on the bank for stabilization. And this was a problem. First of all, they didn't have a permit to do this, but also it altered the natural hydrology of the stream. It impacted habitat and also impacted the chemical and physical integrity of the stream. So now I'm going to discuss kind of the current status of the dredge and fill program. So on January 1st of 2025, we started issuing temporary authorizations, and we will continue issuing them until August 31st, 2026, when the general authorizations become effective. So a temporary authorization is uh, we take a nationwide permit from the Corps. We basically put a cover letter to that nationwide permit, and then we are the ones that enforce that. So it's the exact same thing as a nationwide, except we're the ones enforcing it. Then on February 6th of 2026 this year, the isolated state water general authorization became effective. This is a non-notifying general authorization, and I'll get into a little more details on this general authorization later in the presentation. And then on April 1st, just a few days ago, Regulation 87 became effective, and we issued the public notice for general conditions and the first batch of general authorizations. So we're going to issue general authorizations in 2 batches. This first batch is a larger batch because we're included all the non-notifying, and then we have notifying. And these were also determined by the number. We were able to get a 5-year stretch, which was 2019 to 2024 from the Army Corps, and we looked at what the most common ones were used, and that's where we started. And that's what we issued, and I will go through the website to show you where all that is in a little bit. And then starting September 1st of this year, we will start issuing general authorizations. And it's important to note that these will be the same numbers as the nationwide permits from the Corps. So nationwide permit 3, which is maintenance, will be general authorization 3 in our program. So as I said, starting on April 1st, we issued the general conditions and the first batch of general authorizations for public notice. And I'm just going to walk through real quick the website for this. So this presentation will be made available, which will have all this information in it. But you can see here we have a general authorization page. Just kind of talks about what they are, when will they be available, and then you'll see here there's a button for public notice documents, and it's important to note that it's phase 1, and you would click on that, and these are all the general authorizations and the general conditions that apply to all of the general authorizations, which are available for public comment. And then you'll see in the middle is a submit public comment button, and then you would click that, and there's a form where you can put your information and your comment in that form and submit it. And then this last button is if you are not receiving the emails, which we use the email list from the Reg 87 stakeholder meeting process, then you could click on that button and sign up to get emails for the Reg 87. So now I'm going to talk about implementation. And, oh, sorry, I went the wrong way. Sorry, exemption and exclusions. I apologize for that. So I just want to go over this. This graphic here represents state waters that are not waters of the US. So that's important to note. So if you imagine this triangle having a larger top, those are waters of the US. So we have the authority to issue dredge and fill on all state waters. And it's a very broad definition. But we did not include waters of the US since that's the jurisdiction under the Army Corps of Engineers. Then this next base are non-WOTUS state waters. Then you'll see it further goes down to Colorado exemptions and exclusions. And then that tip of the upside down pyramid here, that's the scope of our dredge and fill program. And so you can see that it's not a very large component of state waters. So that's just kind of this graphic there. And I should note too that exemptions cover activities, exclusions cover water features. So I'm going to walk through these exempted activities, and they're just brief summaries. please go to our Regulation 87 and you can see a full detail
I'll
of.
definitely get down there now.
You can read the full details of these exemptions and exclusions. So exempted activities that are currently covered are activities that are currently covered by a 404 permit, or if you received an approved jurisdictional determination prior to May 25th, 2023, which is when the Sackett decision was issued, that would be considered exempt from our program. Then normal farming and ranching activities. And in the reg, normal farming and ranching activities include plowing, seeding, cultivating, minor drainage, application of on-farm chemicals, harvesting for the production of food, fiber, and forest products, and upland soil and water conservation practices. Now that's a good chunk, but there's more activities that are located in Reg 87. And then it's also important to note that work to construct, extend, or expand or relocate an existing irrigation ditch, acequia, for municipal or industrial purposes is not an exempt activity. So here are more excluded types of waters, ditches and canals and uplands, stormwater control features in uplands, and artificially irrigated areas that would revert to uplands if irrigation stopped. And as you can see that in all these, that the word upland is there. So these are for features that were uplands prior, and then if those ditches or canals were removed, would return to uplands. And then the last exclusion I want to discuss in a little more detail is wetlands adjacent to a ditch or canal that are supported by water in the ditch or canal. Now this is an actual example. It's a very obvious one. There will be more challenging ones in the future, but I just want to show this one because this is one we were able to actually do a desktop review and confirm that it was excluded. As you can see here on the photo on the right, this is a canal, and this is an aerial photograph from 2025. And these points are areas that they want to fix because the canal is leaking. And they came into our program asking if this was exempt or wanted to confirm exemption. And as you can see in each of these spots, there is a definite change in vegetation. And so you can see that these wetland areas, it's kind of obvious that they are being supported by this canal. But then, just to do a little further background, the photo on the left is from 2002. And I understand this was a dry year, but you can see that there's water in this canal. And then you can see that there is no green vegetation, nothing to you can see that there is some drainage patterns there. So by comparing these two photos, and then also looking at the left side of the canal, you can see that there are some drainage features, but there's no indication of wetlands. This one was a very easy one to say, yes, these wetlands are definitely supported by the canal, and therefore they are exempt from dredge or fill to go in and for them to fix the canal. So now excluded features. Here are some more excluded waters. And again, go to Reg 87 to read through the rest of these. There's pretty good list of them. We actually have more than the CORS program. So now I want to just kind of go through what is a ditch. And here at the state, we define a ditch through Reg 87 as a ditch that is designed for at least the partial purpose of increasing drainage of a particular land area or infrastructure for purposes including agriculture, transportation, including roadside and railroad transportation, mosquito abatement, and stormwater management. And then Reg 87 also defines an irrigation ditch or acequia as a human-made feature or a maintained natural feature if use of the maintained natural feature existed as of January 1st, 2024, and an upland swale that moves or conveys water to an ultimate irrigation use or place of use, or moves or conveys irrigation water, also known as runoff, away from irrigated lands. So when is a ditch excluded or exempted? And as you can see, there's various ditches and canals that convey wastewater or water for irrigation, municipal, domestic, industrial, commercial purposes, and augmentation, recharge, wildlife, recreation, compact compliance, and any other purpose. So it's very broad. And then to note that exemption does not include new work or construction to extend, expand, or relocate existing irrigation ditch or acequia for municipal or industrial purposes. So one point with that is, if you can show that there is even some agricultural use and there is a mix of municipal or industrial purposes, but as long as there's some agricultural use, it would likely be exempted. But we've had one where it was municipal and agriculture, and they're able to show us that actually the irrigation component is before the municipal. And so looking at all the information that was provided to us, we were able to say, yep, this is both, therefore it would be exempted. And then excluded water include the ditches and canals and uplands and wetlands that are adjacent and supporting to a ditch or canal. And a wetland is adjacent to a ditch or canal when it is next to, adjoining, or in close proximity to that ditch or canal. Now, this was a topic that was discussed heavily during the rulemaking process, and the commission decided to go with next to as opposed to adjacent or that other terms. But if using the term adjacent, there would be confusion with how the feds use the term adjacent as opposed to how we would use the term adjacent. So this is one that, there is definitely some judgment call, but there is some flexibility here too. And then if there's ever any question, there's always the option to contact us and ask our thoughts on it. We do offer consulting up to 2 hours for free. So, if there's ever a question, you can always ask. And then a wetland is supported by a ditch or canal, and that can be a little more difficult. But if that ditch or canal provide a sufficient quantity, frequency, or duration of water to support under normal circumstances, a prevalence of vegetation typically adapted for life in saturated soil conditions. Also, if the wetland could cease if there was no water provided to the ditch or canal. And again, if you're unsure, you can contact us. What I can say about this is, if you can show us and give us a decent argument on why you feel that way, as long as you can support it, we're not going to argue unless it's, something that is blatantly obvious. But no matter what decision is made, we have to explain why. So we're not just going to say, oh, nope, we don't feel it's that. We have to give you a reasoning why, if we were to think differently than what you would what you're calling it. So now I will pause for some questions because the next part of the presentation is basically the more implementation, but what we're currently doing in the program.
So if you've got any questions, again, you can put them in the chat or you can just unmute and ask your question verbally. So, Scott, do you have any idea on the fees? You said it's free up to 2 hours and then it's $180 after that per hour. Do you have any idea, I mean, how long the average, let's say, question from, we'll say, an agricultural producer might take in terms of giving them an answer that is going to satisfy whether or not they need to get an authorization or not?
That's a great question. So we don't have any experience or not any, I can't give you any examples of it because we just started this. Usually, I will say prior to this, we've been able to deal with stuff in under an hour. But every project's different. So to give some type of estimate would be hard to do. But what I can say on this, and this is something we keep going back and forth on, but I think if it's project specific questions, then we would have to kind of start clocking our hours. And I will say this, that we're not going to, round up. If it's a half hour, if it's 15 minutes, that's what we're going to put. We're not going to upcharge. We're not making money, or well, we have to use this funding to help pay for our program. So with that being said, if it's a general question, we're not going to say that's consulting. If somebody were to say, hey, what if somebody were to put a fence through a wetland, or if somebody in this wetland's next to a ditch, what would be the process to go through? That's where we would make a little judgment call saying, it's likely not something we would say we're consulting on. So we have some flexibility there. But if someone says, I have this project I want to do, I'm putting in a fence right next to this canal, there's a wetland, we need to get this done. The more specific things are, then we have to say, okay, we have to start charging or counting the hours for consulting. And we will let you know too. We're not just going to surprise you and say, oh, we started charging an hour ago. We have to be very transparent on what we're doing. That definitely was directed from the legislature. So we don't want to surprise anybody on our fees or anything like that.
Okay, Scott, I wonder, I don't know if you can see the chat, but there's a question from
Yeah.
Rick Baumgartner that apparently there was a request to move a head gate upstream that had washed out and it was denied for an exemption. And so Rick is just pointing out he feels like that is not does not jibe with the CRS that allows water users to do that without getting any type of authorization. Do you have any idea on that? I mean, Rick, we might need you to unmute and describe it more specifically, but that is not an uncommon thing. I don't know how much you know about irrigation, Scott, but we'll have head gates that will, because of high water, will be severely damaged and will need to be moved. And so, do you have any sense for normal circumstances? There are a couple things here. One is there's a Division of Water Resources aspect to this, and so I don't know if that plays into this or not. Rick, you could provide some commentary there. But from the standpoint of this dredge and fill permit, what would be sort of the guiding issue that would decide whether a head gate could be moved or not without an authorization?
That's a very detailed question, and I can't necessarily speak to his project in particular. I'll be honest, I'm not overly familiar with it, but uh, looking at the situation, looking at the where is this head gate? Um, first and foremost, is it our jurisdiction or is it core jurisdiction? Then if it is our jurisdiction, then we'd have to look at, well, is this agricultural purposes? And by moving, is it moving for, is it considered construction or is it maintenance? So, there's a couple factors we have to look at. But if it's ag related, without, a lot of our exclusions and exemptions are based off of ag comments that were received during the development of the House bill. So, it just all depends on the situation of why it occurred. So I'm sorry, I can't be, it's hard to, without knowing much more about the project, it's hard to make a determination. And I'm not really here to make a determination on why something occurred without really looking into it. But I would suggest that if you want, you could reach out to us and I can look into it a little more.
Yeah, and that, Rick, you might want to follow up with Scott on that. So Scott, I may be jumping ahead here, but and this is the last question I'll ask for now, but we've got sort of a new sheriff in town, which is you guys, right? I mean, before it was the Corps. If you had a question, you called the Corps. My question is, so who do we call now? Should we call you? Presumably, let's say that, we're talking since the Sackett decision. I know you mentioned before the Sackett decision, if you've got an authorization from the Corps, that stands, right? That is not affected by this.
Correct.
But after that, or since then we've got this new Regulation 87, our state regulation. Do we start with you?
So if there's a question about jurisdiction, you would contact the Corps. We are not in the business to do jurisdictional determinations. Now, the Corps has two options there. You can do a preliminary jurisdictional determination, which they turn around rather quickly, from my understanding. I can't speak for the Corps. And then there's the more formal approved jurisdictional determination, which can take much more time to get completed. If you have questions about that, you would contact the Corps. The reason we say that is because if you were to come to us and get an authorization from us, and then it turns out actually the Corps had jurisdiction, the Corps could actually enforce on you even though you have an authorization from us. So it's always better to go to the Corps first if you have a question about it. And then, you can always just email us too. So that's what we would call a general question. If someone was like, I'm not sure about who would have jurisdiction, and you contacted us first, we would just tell you to go to, you need to contact the Corps if you're uncertain.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, we might revisit that a little bit more, but you can go on, I guess.
Are there any more questions? All right, well, I'm just going to jump into the next part, which is our temporary authorizations.
Jesus Christ.
So a temporary authorization is not required if a project is located in waters of the U.S., qualifies for an isolated state water general authorization. The relevant nationwide or regional general permit does not require pre-construction or is exempted or excluded. So those are the reasons if you would not require the authorization through us. So temporary authorizations serve as an interim solution They allow projects to continue until we begin, the division begins issuing general authorizations, which will begin on September 1st, 2026. And then as of January 2025, any person seeking an authorization for discharge of dredge or fill material in the state waters that are not subject to federal jurisdiction shall apply for a temporary authorization. And then a temporary authorization, like I said before, recognizes the nationwide or regional general permit that is normally issued by the Army Corps of Engineers. But the state is the one that actually are issuing that and would be the ones enforcing any conditions that are in that nationwide or regional general permit. And then also, if you are operating under a Clean Water Policy 17, but your project wasn't initiated or hasn't been completed, you would need to apply for a temporary authorization. But I'm not going to expand on that because if you were, you would have received an email from us by now concerning that. And then as of April 1st, we now charge fees for temporary and individual authorizations. The temporary authorizations will only be issued till August 31st, and their duration is for 2 years. So temporary authorizations that are issued before August 31st will be valid for that 2 years, except when the dredge or fill project has not commenced or has commenced but will not be completed by the expiration date in the temporary authorization. Then the project proponent will have to apply for a general authorization at least 45 days prior to such expiration date. And then if a temporary authorization is required for any nationwide or regional general permit that would require pre-construction notification or would require compensatory mitigation. So now I'll do a quick overview of our isolated state water general authorization.
Scott, let me just interrupt for a second. We've got a question in the chat about what waters are specifically our WOTUS waters of the U.S. Is it just the Colorado River or are there others?
Oh, no, there are, it's basically any perennial stream in Colorado that has basically a connection to a navigable, what's considered a navigable water. And I don't have the exact definitions in front of me. You can go on the Army Corps of Engineers website, but you know, the South Platte, the Rio Grande, Arkansas, Colorado, San Juan, you know, the North Platte, those are some that are like the major waters. And if you have a perennial stream that are connected to them, then that would be waters of the U.S. And the other item that they just, I'm not sure if the new WOTUS definition has come out from the EPA yet, but what intermittent streams that flow, have a consistent flow during the wetted season would also be considered waters of the U.S. And you would have to go to the EPA or Army Corps of Engineers to see what that actually means. We're still trying to figure out, and every time I try to talk to the Corps about it, it's, you know, they basically say, well, snow melt would be considered a wetted season, but they never really mention monsoon seasons. So that's why we defer to the Corps on jurisdiction, because of that interpretation. Hopefully that answers your question. And I apologize, I have to, you know, going to the Corps, going to the source EPA, those are the ones that make those rules. So going to their websites is probably the best resource for that. So isolated state water. So we have a slightly different definition for isolated as opposed to the Army Corps of Engineers. So isolated for us means outside of a 100-year floodplain or 1,500 feet or more from another ordinary high water mark of a state water. So that even includes exempted or excluded aquatic features. If there's an ordinary high water mark within 1,500 feet of your project, then it likely is not considered isolated. So the isolated state water general authorization applies to isolated wetlands, ponds and impoundments, and ordinary high water reaches. And then again, these are if they're not exempted or excluded. And then this isolated state water, if your project would have unavoidable adverse impacts that are greater than 1/10 of an acre for wetlands or 3/100ths of an acre for stream bed, it's not eligible. And if your project were to impact fens, peatlands, or kettle ponds, this authorization does not cover that. This authorization is non-notifying. So if your project falls under this, you do not need to notify us. On your project, but you do have to follow the general conditions that we are out for public comment right now. And then ultimately, we're asking folks if they do use this isolated state water, within 90 days of completion, we're asking to fill out a form. It's a very basic form because we do have to report to the legislature. And so we're asking, we can't require it, but we're asking folks if they do utilize this to please report it in so we can report accurate numbers to the legislature. And that's also important because that could impact fees. So now I'm going to just go over general authorizations. So by September 1st, we will be issuing our general authorizations. They will replace the temporary authorizations, and the numbers will correspond with the Army Corps of Engineers nationwide permit. So nationwide permit 3 is going to be general authorization 3, and so on. We do have the authority to create our own, but if we do, we have to go through the what's called the 404B1 process that the Corps uses, and it has to go out for public notice. But there has to be a strong reasoning for us to go through to do a specific general authorization that doesn't already get covered by an existing one. Yeah, excuse me. So, yeah, so that's kind of our general authorizations. Again, the first batch and the conditions are out for public notice right now. So now I'll just go quickly over individual authorizations. An individual authorization will be required for larger projects. If they do not meet the requirements of a temporary or general authorization, and that usually means that there's impacts greater than 1/2 acre. Not always, but that's what the Corps uses. And we will determine if the project will cause more than minimal impacts, then it could fall into the individual authorization. But any type of restoration projects, they'll be probably covered under a general authorization. So then we currently can accept applications for individual authorizations. There is a 30-day pre-application requirement that is in the reg, but we can waive that pending the project. So in the reg, 87.6, I believe it is, the commission adopted rules for the individual authorizations that include application requirements. We have to determine the least environmentally damaging preferred alternative, or LEDPA. There'll be water quality protection requirements, and then monitoring, record keeping, and reporting requirements. One other thing I forgot with the general authorizations, and I apologize, we will have non-notifying general authorizations, the same as the Army Corps. We're not carrying over all of them, but we are carrying over the ones that are applicable to Colorado. So you'll want to take a close look at those too when you're doing a project, whether or not it would be exempted, excluded, if it's non-notifying, those types of things. And then also that's part of why we do the 2 hours of free consulting, is because we could probably figure that out within the 2 hours. So now I'm just going to go over our compliance assistance, oversight, and enforcement. Compliance is a critical component of any regulatory program. The division has responsibilities with program implementation to go beyond permitting. We are able to provide compliance assistance. We will be conducting oversight and enforcement activities to ensure projects comply with the authorizations and the law. So compliance assistance, we currently have some guidance on our website, and we will be updating the website periodically with new information and guidance materials. We are also able to answer general questions. And again, we offer 2 hours of free consultation for project-specific questions, exemption and exclusion requests, and general guidance on authorization terms and conditions. Compliance oversight staff, we will be conducting routine inspections to ensure project compliance. We also have a compliance unit that conducts inspections, construction sites to ensure compliance with stormwater requirements. And this staff is being trained on what a dredge and fill project looks like in the field and may make observations of these types of activities in the field, referring the matter to the dredge and fill unit for follow-up. And then enforcement is a formal mechanism to compel compliance for especially egregious circumstances that pose a threat to public health and environment. Enforcement may result in the imposition of penalties. One other thing too with this is we have the ability to issue after the fact. So if something were to occur and we get a complaint, or if an inspector catches, we're not just going to immediately go into enforcement. We're going to work with you. We're going to, first check to see if it's exempted or excluded, or if it's a non-notifying, and then we can go to the after the fact. And then if none of that works out, then likely end up in enforcement. But again, we will work with you. It's not going to be an immediate enforcement activity. So lastly, I'm just going to cover fees. The legislation funds the program with a combination of general and cash funds. So it is necessary for us to collect fees to support the program. The fee structure is based on the best available data we had at the time of the regulatory development. This included the number of projects that applied for coverage under Clean Water Policy 17 and temporary authorizations. We will revisit the fees now in less than 2 years. December 2027, I believe, is when it's scheduled. And these fees may be adjusted as we see more projects come through for authorization. So we had limited data. And so that's how these fees were determined. And then once we see how things go over the next year and a half, 2 years, then they'll adjust the fees accordingly. And then lastly, request for certification of project completion. Project proponents can request a certification of project completion. This will be a digital form, and project proponents can submit once their project is completed. This will stop the further assessment of fees. So that is all I have. So I'll be happy to answer any other questions or any questions.
Got a question from Alden. What is the anticipated timeline for an individual permit?
So that's a great question. Technically, according to the reg, we have 2 years to do that, but it's going to be project specific. We just have to look at what the project is, what has been done for the project, and then we can make that determination. Small projects will definitely not take 2 years. It can all depend. The best thing I can say is we hope it never takes 2 years, but that's what we're allotted. You know, it all depends too on, you know, if your project, so we have to do a purpose and need analysis. We have to do an alternatives analysis. If your project had NEPA done from a federal agency, we will accept those. So we don't have to go through that process again. That shortens up a lot of time. So you know, so there are different aspects that we can take from a federal document, a NEPA document, and utilize that for our program. So that ultimately will shorten the time. But again, you know, everything's always going to be project specific.
Okay. So I'm going to ask Jessica's question just in a little bit different way. We've got three different types of authorizations, the temporary, the general, and the individual. And can, in a nutshell, I mean, just generally, what is the minimum amount of information that you need to issue these different types of authorization?
So that would be the impact to aquatic resources, whether it's temporary or permanent.
And who has to make that assessment?
Uh, well, whoever's applying, the applicant is applying for it. So um, if you know, if it's a consultant, they would know what to do. If it's somebody that really doesn't have an idea, that's where the 2 hours of free consultation would come in, where we could assist them in how to figure that out. But ultimately, if your project is going to be doing something, it's probably best to get a consultant on board because they would know the program, they would know what needs to be done, and would uh, likely make the process go by a little quicker.
So you need impact. Do you need any engineered drawings, anything like that?
Well, again, everything's case by case. We would most any engineered drawings, yes, would be great. We probably could get by with a minimal engineer drawing. I know they have different levels, 30, 60, 90. Sometimes 30% would be sufficient. Sometimes we need more. The other thing would be mitigation. Is it, you know, what type of mitigation are they proposing? Are they temporary impacts or permanent impacts? You know, so these are, that would be some of the information that would definitely need to be required for us to make that determination. And then also, you know, the project description. So we make sure that the correct uh, temporary authorization or general authorization is being utilized.
Okay, so a little bit of clarity requested on the fees. Are the required fees only for projects that do not receive a 404 permit from the Army Corps, or are they for every project?
They're only for projects that come through us. So if you are getting a 404 permit from the Corps and they are not taking jurisdiction and there's maybe an isolated feature, you would have to come through us and we would have to charge a fee. But if the Corps has jurisdiction over the entire project, then you do not need to come to us at all.
So I wanted to go back, Scott, to the non-exempt on the, let's just take a ditch example. So I think you said that generally if there's an ag component, if the ditch is essentially carrying some ag water, that it's going to be generally exempt if you want to make modifications to that ditch. If it's carrying municipal water, industrial water, and let's just say that the the first part of the ditch is serving ag and the second part of the ditch is not, it's serving a municipal or industrial source, then it sounds like you would look at that separately.
Not necessarily. Again, you know, it's hard not on a case by case basis, but if you can show that that ditch has any agricultural component, we are again. I use the term we are likely to say it's exempt, but we have, if we get asked these questions, we have to ask, okay, can you show us or explain to us how, where the agricultural component is? Is there more water coming in further down from the agricultural part of the ditch? Little things like that we would ask, but more than likely it would be exempt. I mean, yeah, it would more than likely be exempt.
Okay, kind of a follow-up to that.
Yep.
We've got a ditch that carries ag water. Maybe it's exclusive, or maybe it carries some other types of water as well. But this ditch is an open ditch, and they want to pipe it. And part of that piping project, it just makes sense. They've got, let's just say, a prescriptive easement, and it just makes sense to change the alignment a little bit within that easement. Maybe not a huge amount, but they're going to move off of the formal open ditch course. In the past, there's been a question about whether or not that ditch needs a 404 permit or not. And there was, there were nuances about whether water from that ditch return flowed back into a navigable water or not. What is the current status under the new Regulation 87 for that type of a situation?
Well, again, I just got to keep reiterating each situation is going to be different. But, looking at it would depend on how much of an alignment change that would be. If it's very minor, then chances are if it met all the, all the definitions of what we would consider exempt or excluded, then it likely would be. Um, if it's a major change, then chances are it probably would look at it as new construction. But again, when we're dealing with hypothetical situations, that I can't really give a solid answer other than, we just have to look at all the details of it to make a really good call on whether or not we believe it's exempted or excluded. But like I said before, too, we have to give you a reason why. If we were to say it was not, then we'd have to explain why that is. It's not just we don't think it is and that's it. We have to explain why.
Okay. Yeah. Good to know. So I also wanted to jump back to, I think it was the isolated state waters general authorization, if I have it, if I have it this under the right category is. So you're you're eligible for essentially for, I guess, for coverage. I didn't quite understand whether you were excluded or you were eligible for coverage under the general authorization if you are below, let's say on an acre basis, if you were disturbing less than 3/100ths of an acre in the stream.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, so if you're disturbing less than 3/100ths of an acre in a stream, let's just say to rebuild your diversion structure, then that is exempt or excluded.
Well, so if it was considered an isolated area, which I'm not sure you would be putting in a diversion in an isolated stream bed or state water. But if it was under that, then yes, it would be, it would fall under the non-notifying isolated state water general authorization. But again, isolated is defined through us as not within 1,500 feet of another ordinary high water mark, or if it falls within a 100-year floodplain. And then if there is no 100-year floodplain map from FEMA, then you just default to the 1,500 feet.
Okay. And as far as just in, a non-isolated situation, for, larger diversion, you need to get in there and rebuild the push dam to direct water into your head gate. Uh, Under what circumstances would that activity not be exempt?
Uh, um, so I that's a hard question. I'm going to have to get back to you on that.
Okay.
That
Yeah,
that's
there's
pretty specific, and I don't want to answer that without having some information to kind of back up my response.
yeah. Well, that's a good place to leave it, I think, because there are a number of these things that I think we could put down on paper, these types of situations that are not super uncommon for ag producers that maybe we could get some clarity on. And I understand, nothing is super cut and dried, but there are commonalities around the state in some of these, how these diversion structures work and how they're made and constructed and how they're maintained. And so there are areas I think that we could maybe get some additional clarity that would be useful for the ag industry to be able to understand whether they're excluded or whether they need to get some type of an authorization.
Yeah, and yeah, I feel free if you want to send questions. We're working on a frequently asked questions document. I mean, there's one up there right now, but it's a work in project progress. We'll be adding to it. But yeah, feel free if you have questions, send them. Uh, I'll definitely answer them. It's not consultation. These are just general questions. And, if you go to our website and look at the exemption exclusion button, you know, this House bill and then the reg, the agricultural exemptions and exclusions are much broader than the cores. So there are situations where it's not going to be covered under those exemption or exclusions, but I have to say, take a close look at those because there's probably a good chance that they are covered.
And Scott, I just took the liberty of, excuse me, putting your email address in the chat. So uh, people might be sending you emails with
That's
questions.
that's
I hope
fine.
that's okay.
Yep. Thank you for putting that email. Yeah, we have multiple people that monitor that email address, so that they won't get pushed aside. Um, we respond pretty quickly. We try to anyway.
Well, we're up against the clock, and I really appreciate your time, Scott. I can't say this has been terribly easy to understand, but it never is with a new regulation. And I know it takes time to kind of figure out how this is going to be rolled out. And as you go along, I'm sure you'll be learning a lot more. So maybe it's something where in a year or two we want to reconvene after you guys have had boots on the ground more and seen more situations, and we can provide greater clarity.
Would be glad to. I will. We are. You know, we'll be learning a lot over the next year. So definitely, anytime you want us to speak or talk about anything, we're more than happy to. We want to get the word out. We want to make sure everyone understands. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this group, and please email and let us know about questions and thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Scott. And just to everybody, if you didn't get Scott's email, you've got mine. If you want to send your questions to me, I'll be happy to forward those on to Scott. And and if you've got any comments or specific situations, send them on. Those would be great, I think, to take a look at it as a kind of a quasi case study. And you can remain anonymous if you want to. So, thanks for joining us today. And again, we're going to be posting the recorded webinar as well as the slides, and I'll do a quick highlights that will kind of summarize Scott's main points. So, thanks again for joining us. Have a great afternoon.